Welcome to the Raised with Jesus podcast, where the life of Jesus meets yours for 10 minutes every day. You've got your daily Bible reading for December 20th, looking at the first portion of Luke chapter 6. When Jesus was going through the grain fields on a Sabbath day, his disciples were picking heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands, and eating them. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered him, "Haven't you read what David did when he was hungry, he and his companions? He went into the house of God, took and ate the bread of the presence, which is lawful only for the priests to eat. He also gave some to his companions." Jesus also said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath day he went into the synagogue and taught. A man was there whose right hand was withered. The experts in the law and the Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. They wanted to find a reason to accuse him, but he always knew their thoughts. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Stand up and step forward." He got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I will ask you something. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at all of them and told the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did, and his hand was restored. They were filled with rage and began discussing with one another what they could do to Jesus. It happened in those days that Jesus went up on the mountain to pray, and he spent all night in prayer to God. When it was day, he summoned his disciples and chose 12 of them, whom he also called apostles: Simon, whom he also called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, also Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. He went down with them and stood on a level place with a large crowd of his disciples and a large number of people from all Judea and Jerusalem, as well as from the coastal area of Tyre and Sidon. These people came to listen to him and to be healed of their diseases. Those who were troubled by unclean spirits were also cured. The whole crowd kept trying to touch him, because power was going out from him and healing them all. He lifted up his eyes to his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, because yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, because you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, because you will laugh. Blessed are you whenever people hate you, and whenever they exclude you and insult you, and reject your name as evil, because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy because of this. Your reward is great in heaven." The fact is, their fathers constantly did the same things to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, because you are receiving your comfort now. Woe to you who are well fed now, because you will be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, because you will be mourning and weeping. Woe to you when all people speak well of you, because that is how their fathers constantly treated the false prophets. This is the word of our God. You could almost trace the progression in Jesus' ministry. Here in chapter 6, he calls the disciples to himself, and he chooses 12 of them to be apostles, those who are sent out quite literally. And there's definitely been progress and a bit of a progression where he has another healing on the Sabbath day after this account of the disciples doing work on the Sabbath day. Look at that, they're threshing wheat by rolling some grains of or heads of wheat in their hand and then eating it. And the Pharisees would say, or they did say, "Isn't that unlawful? Why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath day? They're doing work. Don't you see that rubbing the husk off the head of the wheat is work?" Obviously missing the point that Jesus makes there at the end. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And as he says elsewhere, that man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was for man. Meaning, the Sabbath day was a day of rest and worship, where people would devote time in rest and worship to their Lord. And so the Sabbath was an opportunity for people to serve God. And to walk around and make themselves slaves of the Sabbath day wasn't right. And so Jesus kind of makes that exact same point, that on occasion the law of love, or the idea that human need surpasses their ceremonial law, has been also the case in the past. David entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence. If you were to go into the tabernacle and later the temple, and all the way up to the temple building itself, you walk in the big front door, and off to your left is a table that had like 12 new loaves of bread every day. And at the end of the day, those would be taken out, and then the next morning they would put in 12 new loaves of bread. And then that bread would be eaten by the priests, and it was only lawful for being eaten by the priests. But David and his companions had eaten that bread. Not lawful, but they needed food and they were hungry. And in that case, going against a ceremonial law was permissible in order to alleviate human pain and suffering. And when we apply that principle, that the man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man, we keep in mind that Jesus is primarily talking about externals, such as ceremonial law. Not so much talking about the binding moral law that is binding on all people, but rather just kind of the external traditions and the trappings and the actions that they might undertake as they went about their worship. And Jesus says, well, make sure that you keep this straight. You're not worshiping the Sabbath day, and your worship to God is not being carried out if you are elevating the Sabbath day above your care for people, demonstrating love to each other. And we've got that exact same example, just in a little bit different way, or a little bit more forward type of way perhaps, when this man with a crippled or a withered hand is healed on the Sabbath day. And at the end of there in verse 11, they're filled with rage and began discussing with one another what they could do to Jesus. What are they most irritated about? The fact that he healed on the Sabbath day? That's kind of ridiculous. Or the fact that he was actually able to heal somebody. Because miracles haven't really been done since the days of Elisha and Elijah. And sometimes people get the impression that miracles are happening all the time in Bible times. Well, not really. They were happening at the time of the Exodus, at the time of Elisha and Elijah, and then again at the time of Jesus. And then in the in-between times, there wasn't much of all, if at all anything, as far as miracles went. And then there were some miracles in the early church period as well, that we'll see in the book of Acts. And what we see is that God usually only steps in and does miracles, that is, acting outside of his normal established natural laws, when his church is on the verge of extinction, or when it's on the razor's edge of destruction, right? Elisha and Elijah are serving at a time when Baal worship is the official religion of Palestine, of Israel. And so God steps in. And here, Jesus is walking the earth visibly, and Satan is ramping up his opposition and inciting the Pharisees to hatred of Jesus. And you've got demons possessing people left and right. And Satan is working so hard, and so Jesus steps in and says, here, I'm going to use a little bit of my supernatural power to set things straight. And so this man stretches out his withered hand, and Jesus doesn't even touch the guy. Jesus just says, show us your hand. He was probably a little self-conscious from having this hand and, dealing with the looks that people would give him from his entire life. And when Jesus says, stretch out your hand, and it is healed, man, probably could have heard the gasps and the smiles and the laughter and the joy at the fact that God had come to help his people, and there he was healing them. But that is only met by the gnashing of teeth by the Pharisees. Got to find a way to get rid of this Jesus. What are we going to do to him? What are we going to do about this? He's healing people. He's alleviating pain and suffering. Sarcasm and cynicism probably has its place, and that would probably soon turn to horror at what they plan to do, because it doesn't make sense. But then again, sin makes us stupid. Because of sin, when we get blinded by sin or caught up or ensnared in a sin, we make stupid decisions. Decisions that hurt ourselves and others, decisions that don't make sense, for all sorts of wrong reasons, including seeking the approval of others, which is kind of the contrast that we have between verses 22 and 26. Verse 22, "Blessed are you whenever people hate you, whenever they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man." And verse 26, "Woe to you when all people speak well of you, because that is how their fathers constantly treated the false prophets." The bottom line is this, that no matter the opposition, the fact that Jesus came for you and for me to win forgiveness is something that no one else can take away from us, and we can find joy in that as an objective and completed fact that we all share together, that we have been called into one holy body as members of this holy Christian church, and we can rejoice in that fact despite any opposition and any apparent success or lack of success that God's church might experience. And so, as we conclude today, as with Christmas just around the corner, just to keep in mind the idea that your reward is great in heaven, and that is every reason to leap for joy and rejoice, despite opposition or despite success. The fact that your name is written in the book of life because Jesus died and rose for you is more precious than anything this world has to offer or anything that this world could take away from you. And then, kind of as a foretaste of that, your brothers and sisters in Christ who sit next to you in the pew or in the chairs or are in fellowship with us across the city and across the country through our Wisconsin Synod, those are brothers and sisters that we cherish as fellow citizens of heaven, of people whose names have been written there. Now, of course, you can find us Sunday morning at 2250 South Hollandsvania Road in Maumee. You could also follow us on Instagram at Raised with Jesus. God bless your day.